Ever put a ton of work into like a training or even just trying to learn something new and it just doesn't click?
Ugh, yeah, it's the worst.
Well, today we are going deep on a chapter all about creating instructional materials.
Sounds like just what we need.
Yeah, so we can finally figure out why that happens and what we can actually do about it.
I'm in.
Perfect. So
Yeah.
I got to say, going through all this stuff, I was kind of surprised by just how many different approaches there are.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, everything from like that classic ADDIE model, you know the one,
Yeah, I know it.
to things I'd honestly never even heard of, like connectivism.
Connectivism.
Yeah, it's all about how we learn in this crazy digital age.
Huh, I like it already. And I think that's what's so cool about this whole field, you know?
What's that?
There's no like one-size-fits-all solution.
Right?
You really got to find the right approach for your own specific needs and goals.
I feel that. Okay, so let's kick things off with one we've probably all heard of at some point, right?
Okay.
The ADDIE model.
Ah, a classic.
And it's supposed to be like super systematic.
Right, totally. I mean, think about it. You ever taken a training that just felt like all over the place?
Oh, too many times.
Right, and ADDIE is kind of like that roadmap, you know, to help you avoid all that.
Okay, yeah.
So it's analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. Really forces you to think through that entire learner journey.
I see, yeah, from the very beginning. So you don't just end up with like a random bunch of activities with no clear connection between them.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes total sense. But I have also heard that ADDIE can be a little bit rigid.
Yeah, that's true. And that's where like the iterative part comes in, right?
Yeah.
It's not just like this linear step-by-step process.
Right.
You're constantly evaluating and refining as you go.
So you're circling back around, like those spiral notebooks we all had in school.
Exactly.
So how does that compare to like the Dick and Carey model?
Oh, good one.
I've heard that one like emphasizes a ton of upfront planning.
A ton. Dig and Carey are all about having all your ducks in a row before you even start creating stuff.
Wow.
So it's identifying your instructional goals, what your learners should be able to do, and how you're going to assess them.
Right from the get-go.
Oh, yeah. Right from the start.
Okay, so I can see how that would be super helpful, especially with like these big complex projects, but isn't there like a risk of being too rigid? I mean, the world's changing so fast. What happens if your initial plan just like becomes obsolete?
Yeah, for sure. That's where being able to adapt and adjust your plan as you go is just essential.
Right. You got to be flexible.
Totally. Like they say, no plan survives contact with reality.
That's the truth. Okay, well, speaking of adapting, let's shift gears to an approach that seems like tailor-made for today's fast-paced world.
No, I like it.
The SAM, or the Successive Approximation Model. This one seems like perfect for when you just need to move quickly and be flexible.
You got it. It really embraces that whole fail fast, learn faster mentality. SAM is all about that rapid prototyping, getting feedback quickly, and making adjustments as you go along.
I can see how that would be perfect for a project where, like, the technology or the content's always changing.
For sure. You need to be able to prototype and adapt. It's essential.
Totally agree. Have you found that to be true in your work? Like, you really need to be able to move fast and change things up.
Oh, absolutely. It's more and more important now just to be super agile and responsive.
Yeah, you got to be on your toes. So it's almost like, building a house, but instead of having that whole blueprint up front, you're kind of starting with a basic structure and you're just constantly refining it.
Exactly. Based on feedback and all those ever-changing requirements.
Love that analogy. Okay, so we've got ADE, which is systematic but can be rigid.
Right.
We've got Dick and Carey, all about that meticulous planning.
Love it.
And then SAM, which is like agility central.
It's the best.
But now I want to move on to an approach that feels a little more focused on how we as individuals learn best.
I'm listening.
The constructivist approach.
Ah, yes.
This one really resonates with me because it just acknowledges that learning is an active process.
100%.
Yeah.
Constructivism throws out that whole idea of learners just being empty vessels waiting to be filled.
Like robots or something.
Right. It emphasizes how important it is for learners to actually construct their own understanding.
You make those connections.
Exactly. Through experience, through exploration, and interaction.
It's giving me flashbacks to those hands-on science museums.
Oh, I love those.
Remember where you could like play with exhibits and figure things out for yourself?
The best.
So much more engaging than just reading about it in a textbook.
It's about creating those aha moments,
Yes.
those moments of insight that come from actually engaging with the material. And those stick with you.
So much longer than just passively listening to someone talk at you.
Way longer.
And connectivism Oh my gosh, this one kind of blows my mind because it takes that idea of active learning and it just throws it into the digital age.
Okay, tell me more.
It's like learning doesn't stop when the course ends.
Right.
It's about that whole network you build.
The connections you make.
Exactly.
Yeah. Connectivism gets that in today's world, knowledge is everywhere. It's distributed. It's in networks. It's online.
And it's constantly evolving.
Right. So learning's about tapping into that, finding what you need, and connecting with others.
Makes me think about how much I've learned from like online communities and forums,
Oh, yeah.
connecting with people who are passionate about the same things I am.
Totally.
Okay, so we've covered some major instructional design approaches, from the old school to the cutting edge, but our chapter also mentions a bunch of others, like little shout-outs. You ready for a rapid fire round?
Hit me.
Okay, first up, rapid prototyping. What's the gist?
So it's kind of like a streamlined approach for when you need to get something out there fast. A basic version.
Okay, and speed is key.
Speed and iteration, not perfection.
I like it. Okay, what about problem-based learning, PBL?
Oh, that one's fun. It's about putting learners in the driver's seat, making them problem solvers instead of just like giving them info.
Right.
You give them a real-world challenge and guide them to find solutions.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, how about Bloom's taxonomy? This one always sounds a little intimidating.
It's really not. It's just a framework for design and learning objectives.
Okay.
It helps you break down those skills and knowledge you want your learners to get
Right.
into different levels, from basic remembering to like higher order thinking.
So analyzing and creating.
Yeah. So basically you make sure your activities are targeting the right skills.
That makes sense. Avoid that trap of just focusing on memorization.
Exactly.
Okay, speaking of traps, what about cognitive load theory? What is that?
It's all about understanding the limits of our work in memory.
Okay, so like how much we can actually hold in our brains at once.
Yeah. So as designers, we got to be mindful of how much info we're given at once and how we present it so we don't overload people.
Right, don't just dump everything on them at once.
Exactly. It's like being a good chef. You don't just throw all the ingredients in a pot at once.
You got to prepare them, make it taste good.
You got it. Make it digestible.
Last but not least, andragogy.
Ah, yes.
What is that?
So adults, we learn differently than kids, right?
Of course. We've got baggage. I mean, experience.
Right. More experience, more self-directed, more responsibilities. And andragogy takes all that into account.
Okay.
So it focuses on relevance, practicality, and autonomy.
Makes sense. Adults need a different approach.
We're not blank slates.
Definitely not.
We're bringing a whole lot of experience and knowledge with us.
A whole lot.
And you got to tap into that.
All right. Well, we just did a whirlwind tour of instructional design approaches, from the tried and true to the brand new. But how do you know which one to choose?
Right. There's so many.
That's where the art of selecting the right approach comes in, and that's what we're going to dive into next.
I'm excited. There's no right or wrong answer.
Sure.
But there's some key things to consider.
That'll help you make the best choice for your situation.
Exactly.
Okay, so before we jumped into all that, we were talking about how there are just so many different approaches to instructional design.
I know, right?
It's kind of overwhelming to know where to even begin.
It can be.
But thankfully, this chapter has a whole section on how to pick the right approach.
Yeah. And the key is there's no one right answer.
Right.
It's about understanding your needs, your learners, and like the whole context of your learning thing.
Okay. So it's like having a whole wardrobe full of instructional design outfits.
Haha. Love it.
But you got to pick the right one for the occasion.
Exactly. And just like with fashion, you can mix and match, right?
Oh, for sure. Create something unique. Okay, but where do we even begin with all this?
Well, the chapter mentions something called a needs analysis.
Needs analysis, okay.
It's like laying the foundation for your whole learning experience.
Got it.
It's gathering information, really understanding your learners, like their backgrounds, what motivates them, their goals, what they already know.
So it's like a detective case.
Ooh, I like that.
You're solving the mystery of how to help people learn best.
Yes. And just like a good detective, you got to gather clues.
Right.
From all kinds of sources like surveys, interviews.
Looking for evidence.
Exactly.
Okay, so once you've got all those clues, what do?
You got to put the pieces together, right? You start seeing who your learners are, what they need, how they learn best.
Makes sense.
And that becomes the foundation for your design decisions.
You're building on that solid ground.
Totally.
Okay, so we understand our learners. Now what? The chapter also mentions like aligning your approach with your learning objectives.
So important. Basically, what do you want your learners to be able to do at the end of all this?
Right. What should they walk away with?
Yeah. What knowledge, skills, attitudes are you hoping to develop?
It's like, setting destination before a road trip.
Love that. You got to know where you're going.
Right. Before you can plan the route.
And then you got to figure out the best vehicle to get there.
I'm with you.
Some objectives need, like, a more hands-on approach. Others maybe something more structured.
So it's not just about picking the right instructional design model.
Yeah.
It's about picking the right activities too, right?
Exactly. It's like having a whole toolbox and picking the right tools.
Makes sense.
Oh.
All right, so we've got our learners, we've got our objectives. Anything else we need to think about?
Well, the chapter mentions content type and technology.
Okay, yeah.
Those are biggies. Like, is your content super technical or more conceptual? Is it text heavy? Is it visual? Is it audio?
I see, yeah. It's like choosing the right cooking method.
Uh-huh. What do you mean?
Well, you wouldn't cook fish the same way you'd cook a steak.
Right. Different approaches for different content.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, and what about technology?
That's a big one. Tech can be a powerful tool for learning.
For sure.
But you got to use it strategically. You wouldn't use a hammer to screw in a light bulb, would you?
Hopefully not.
So you got to choose the right tool for the job.
Makes sense. How do we actually decide which tech is right?
It depends, right? Your learners, your objectives, the content, your budget.
Of course, budget always comes into play.
But some questions to think about are, like, what are your learners already comfortable with?
What's going to best support their learning?
Exactly. And what can you afford, realistically?
Right, that's always a factor.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of learners, the chapter talks about learning styles.
Yeah, I love that topic. It's fascinating.
Do you think it's important to try to cater to all those different styles?
I think it's important to be aware of them, for sure.
Yeah.
But I also think it's a trap to, like, put learners into boxes. This person's visual, this person's auditory.
Right, people are complex.
Totally. And how they like to learn can even change depending on what they're learning.
Okay, that's a good point. So maybe it's more about providing options and letting learners choose what works for them.
Exactly. A flexible learning environment that meets everyone's needs.
I like it. The chapter also talks about engagement and motivation.
Huge.
I know I'm way more likely to stick with something if it's interesting and engaging.
Absolutely. That's where things like gamification and storytelling come in.
Oh, storytelling.
It's powerful.
A good story just pulls you in, makes you forget you're even learning.
And stories help us connect on an emotional level, right?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And they make that information stick with you.
Totally.
They make it more relevant to your life.
They do.
Okay, so we've talked about needs analysis, objectives, content, tech, learning styles, engagement. What about the more practical side of things, like assessment and feedback? How do we know if people are actually learning?
Right. Well, assessment shouldn't be just a one-time thing at the end.
Oh, I hate those.
It should be ongoing. And the feedback, you give it regularly, make it specific and useful, help learners see their strengths, their weaknesses, how to improve.
So it's not just about grading, it's about supporting them along the way.
It's about creating a culture of learning and improvement.
I love that. Okay, so we've covered a lot. Anything else we need to keep in mind?
A few practical things. Budget and resources.
Always a factor.
Flexibility and adaptability. And then testing your ideas. Pilot testing and iterative design.
Right, I've got to make sure things actually work in practice.
Totally. And be ready to change things as you go. It's like sailing a boat. You got to adjust to the wind and the waves.
And you got to test the boat before you set sail for real.
Exactly.
Well, wow, I feel like I have a much better handle on all the things involved in choosing the right instructional design approach now.
It's a lot, but we broke it down.
We did.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of breaking things down, our chapter actually has a case study
It does.
that shows all of this in a real-world situation.
A project management excellence program.
Ooh, tell me more.
It's a great example of putting all this theory into practice.
Perfect. Well, let's dive into that case study next.
Let's do it. See how all the pieces come together?
Okay, so you ready to put all this instructional design theory into practice?
I am. Let's do it.
Awesome. Because before we got into all that, we were about to jump into that case study, right?
Yes, the one for a project management excellence program.
Okay, so remind me again, what's this program all about?
Okay, so imagine you're like a mid-level manager, a team leader,
Got it.
responsible for projects, but you've never really had any formal training in project management.
Makes sense. So this program is for those people.
Exactly. It gives you the skills, the tools to really excel in that role.
Okay, so it's not just for like seasoned project managers then.
Nope, not at all. It's for anyone who wants to get better at project management, whether they're brand new or just want to level up.
Awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, and what does this program actually look like? Is it all lectures and textbooks?
Yeah.
Or is it something a little more exciting?
Actually, it's a mix. It's a blended learning approach.
Okay, I like that.
They do online modules, in-person workshops, even some practical assignments.
A little bit of everything.
It keeps things interesting.
Totally. So walk me through it. Like, what would someone actually be doing in this program?
So the online modules cover the basics, like different project management methodology.
Okay, so like agile, waterfall.
Exactly. You got to start with the theory, right?
So you get the foundation and then...
And then you actually get to apply it. In the workshops,
Okay.
they're super interactive, case studies, role-playing, all that good stuff, so you can actually practice your skills in a safe space.
So it's not just sitting there listening to someone talk at you.
Definitely not. You're learning by doing,
Yeah.
and you're learning from each other, which is huge.
Yeah, I love that. What about those practical assignments? What do those look like?
Okay, this is where it gets really cool.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
Participants work in teams, right?
Okay.
And they actually plan and execute like a mini project.
Oh, wow. From start to finish.
The whole thing. It's like a simulation of a real project.
That's awesome. So they get to go through that whole project life cycle, figure out the scope, manage a budget.
Deal with all those unexpected challenges.
Right, because those always come up. I mean, listening to you describe this, I'm starting to see how this program connects back to all those instructional design approaches we talked about earlier.
It does, right. It's like they took the best parts of each one.
Totally. Like they've got that systematic approach from ADDIE,
Right.
those clear objectives like Dick and Carey were all
For
about,
sure.
and even some of that flexibility and iteration from Sam with those feedback loops built right in.
It's the ultimate combo.
Love it.
Yeah.
And, not only does this case study lay out the whole program, but it even breaks down the budget.
Oh, yeah, which is so helpful to see.
Pretty
It
key.
gives you a sense of what it actually takes to make a high-quality learning experience happen. It's not just theory, it's reality.
Right, you got to have the resources to back it up. I'm also impressed by how much they emphasize evaluation and feedback in this program.
Yeah, they're all about that.
They use surveys, they do focus groups, they're even tracking the outcomes to see what's working and what's not, like a constant cycle of improvement.
They're always trying to get better.
Which is what it's all about, right? Okay, so big picture. What are the biggest takeaways from this case study? What can our listeners learn from this example?
I think the main takeaway is that designing great learning experiences, it's a process.
It takes work.
It takes planning, it takes being intentional, and it takes being open to trying new things and adjusting along the way.
So you're not going to find the perfect model, the perfect solution. It's about understanding the principles and applying them thoughtfully.
And making it work for your specific learners and goals.
I feel that. And those principles, they're not just for fancy programs, right?
No, they're for everyone, even if you're just trying to learn something new on your own.
You can use these ideas. Be a more conscious learner.
Totally.
Okay, well, as we wrap up this deep dive into instructional design, what's one final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
Think about something, just one thing that really resonated with you today. Maybe a specific approach, a strategy, a new way of looking at learning.
Whatever it is, hold on to that.
Find a way to use it in your work, in your life.
I love that challenge. And if you're like, I need to know more, check out the resources in the chapter.
Oh, yeah, there's so much good stuff out there. Keep exploring, keep learning.
This world of instructional design is huge, and it's always changing. So much to discover.
There is. Keep finding new ways to make learning more effective, more engaging.
More fun.
Absolutely.
Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this adventure.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into something new and exciting.
Sounds good.
Until then, happy learning, everyone.